What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I'm going to be doing something that I've been wanting to do for a while, which is talk about The Hobbit. This channel is obviously called Hobbricks, and started out as a Hobbit channel, and I just haven't done a lot of Hobbit content since the channel started. But today, we're going to be talking about The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, the first film in the Hobbit Trilogy, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, so I'm going through every Middle-earth movie, from The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey to The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. A lot of people are going to be like, why aren't you doing Star Wars? Because, you know, Rise of Skywalker. I don't know, I just don't really care about Star Wars, and I don't really care about doing that. But I've been wanting to do this for a while. So we're going to be talking about The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey today. And this trilogy means a lot to me because it's really produced some great memories. Because, you know, I grew up when I was really young, like 4 or 5, like really young age. My sisters always made me watch Lord of the Rings, and I just really loved the Lord of the Rings films. And so when The Hobbit came out, I was like 6 or 7. I think I was 7 years old when The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey came out, and I loved it, and it's still one of my favorite movies. And I'm not even kidding about that statement. Like, all of these movies are some of my favorite movies of all time, from The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey to The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. And this isn't scripted. I don't have any major points to say, but I just really love this film, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. I know a lot of people think that this is the weakest of the Hobbit trilogy. I don't agree. I think it's the second best. I think The Desolation of Smaug is easily the best film in the trilogy, and Battle of the Five Armies is the weakest, still with some great elements in it. But just, I really love The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, and just a lot of the themes and ideas they play around with in here. Also, a lot of the CGI looks pretty good. Like the wargs, or the wargs, however you want to say it, which are, you know, the wolf creatures that the orcs ride on. They look kind of odd in some shots, but overall, a lot of it looks really good, and I think a lot of the CG improves as the films go along. I think it actually still holds up pretty well. Like, the final shot of Smaug's eye opening still looks freaking fantastic. But, you know, I really love the idea they try to go for, and I think it's pretty subtle. And it honestly made me tear up watching it this time. Like, it made me cry. Where, you know, Bilbo Baggins... what I love the most about The Hobbit as an idea or as a story is it's not about a big person. You know, it's not like, I don't know, like Marvel or Star Wars, where it's about this person destined to become, like, this person, you know. It's about a random person, Bilbo Baggins, who is just the most random person to be chosen, and it's like, why was I chosen to be this person? And, like, in one scene, Galadriel, I'm obviously assuming you've seen the films because this video will have spoilers for it, so I am assuming you've seen the films. If you haven't, go watch them, and then go watch the series, because these films are fantastic. And obviously I recommend you read the books as well, but if you don't have time for that, definitely watch the films at least. But there's a scene where Galadriel, played by Cate Blanchett, asks Gandalf, why the halfling? Why Bilbo Baggins? And he says, it's not Saruman thinks that it's the large things, you know, the powers to keep the darkness at play. I believe that it's the small things to keep the darkness at play. The small things that we take for granted. And that really sums up, I think, the main idea of Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien's story as a whole. And a lot of scenes in this movie are, honestly, kind of beautiful. And I think really encapsulate that. And, like, the movie starts off, Bilbo Baggins is, like, this, like, touchy guy, doesn't want the dwarves coming in, and, you know, ransacking his home. And it's honestly a pretty funny movie at the beginning. Like, I don't mind the dwarves' antics. I know some people don't like the dwarves' antics. I love it. I love all that stuff at the beginning, when they come in his house, and I think the funniest things in this movie are the subtle things. Like, there's multiple times where Gandalf gets mad at Thorin, because Thorin is, like, has this huge grudge against elves, and has had this grudge against elves for years, and Bilbo just, like, Martin Freeman as Bilbo, he just nails it. He's so perfect. And I honestly think Elijah Wood as Frodo in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he's kind of bad, like, at some points in that trilogy, but Martin Freeman is just a likable guy, and not just that, but he just he embodies the mannerisms of Bilbo Baggins perfectly, like, and just the like whenever like Gandalf says something that like Thorin's always like, no, whatever, like he's like, I don't like being here with the elves, and then Gandalf is like, the only ill will you bring is that which you bring yourself, and then like Martin Freeman's face is like, well, can't argue with that, you know, like just the little mannerisms that like Martin Freeman has as this character, they're just perfect, and this whole movie is just honestly really well cast. The fact that a lot of these actors that play the dwarves, like Bomber and Biffer, two of the dwarves, they don't have any lines of dialogue in the entire trilogy, but these actors actually cared about this. Like, they actually wanted to do this. And if you look at, like, the behind the scenes and all that, like, they really enjoy the process of making these films. And for characters that could be considered annoying or side characters, it really shows. And I think that people take this trilogy for granted, and think that, you know, a lot of people didn't care about making it, when clearly they did. And clearly a lot of the actors cared about making these films. And it really shows, I think, because there is a lot of heart in this film, and I think that, honestly, a lot of it works really well. Like Bilbo starts off, he's like, he doesn't want to go, because, you know, he's a Baggins, and he believes that, you know, and then, you know, a lot of the characters, I think it's kind of what J.R.R. Tolkien was going for in his original writing, is a lot of these characters are mirror images of each other, and when Gandalf says, I think it's the small things that keep the darkness at play, Sauron hasn't been around for years. 400 years, they say in this film, was when they defeated Sauron, and they believe that he's gone. And it's kind of true that the small things keep the darkness at play, because Gollum was the one who has had the rings for all these years and has stayed underground, or has had the one ring, and has stayed underground, and no one ever knew about him. No one cares about the small things. No one cares about the small people. And that's kind of exactly what they're going for. Like, Gollum is honestly a mirror image of Bilbo, and like in the Lord of the Rings, a scene that I don't really quite love is where Gandalf is talking to Frodo, and Frodo's like, I'm scared, and then Gandalf says, I forget what he says, but then at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo's like getting freaked out, and then he has like a flashback. In this movie, Gandalf tells Bilbo, he gives him Sting, the sword Sting, which he doesn't name until Desolation of Smaug, granted, but he gives him the sword, and Bilbo's like, I've never fought, Gandalf, I don't want to fight. And he says, and I hope you never have to, but if you do, keep this in mind, the measure of bravery is not to take life, but to spare one. And Bilbo comes up to a moment like that in the film, where he's invisible, he has the ring, and he could easily kill Gollum, but he doesn't, and he takes pity upon him, because Gollum is honestly a dark image, or mirror of Bilbo. He was a hobbit. No, he wasn't a hobbit, but he was a similar creature to a hobbit. And he really is a mirror image of Bilbo, and what Bilbo honestly will become in The Lord of the Rings, at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings. Because there's a scene where he basically becomes Gollum, and it's disturbing. But it serves a purpose. And, you know, at the end of The Lord of the Rings trilogy, I know I'm going off on a tangent about a different franchise, but Bilbo kind of just, like, is like, okay, whatever, the ring, whatever, I don't care anymore, and it's like Bilbo's learned to let it go, which is something that Gollum could never do. But, you know, going back to it, Gollum is a mirror image of Bilbo, so Bilbo takes pity on him and doesn't kill him, and it doesn't feel the need to have a flashback like The Lord of the Rings does to explain to the audience. It just assumes the audience has a brain and can piece it together, and it's honestly kind of beautiful. And another thing they keep bringing up is, you know, Thorin's whole thing throughout the movie is, like, even though the whole trilogy has a main theme running throughout it, this movie has its own theme as well, and it does kind of stand on its own pretty well. Where, you know, it begins, and Bilbo is this selfish, and just, he's like this picky person, and there's a line where Gandalf's talking to Thorin Oakenshield, and he says, Thorin's like, oh, the elves betrayed my grandparents, and then Gandalf is my father and my grandfather, and Gandalf says, you are neither of them. And Bilbo thinks that he can't be like he has to be like his ancestors, like, the Tooks were the adventurous ones, but the Bagginses, they were the ones that just sat at home and ate and didn't ever do anything with their lives. And Bilbo thinks that he has to be like that, but then, you know, when he decides to go on the adventure, he realizes, I don't have to be like my relatives. I don't have to be them. And that's another thing that kind of mirrors Bilbo and Thorin together. And then later on, Thorin says, when Bilbo almost falls off the cliff, he says to Bilbo, "Oh, he doesn't belong here. He's been lost since he, like, left his home. You know, he shouldn't be here. He's not part of the company. He doesn't belong here." And then Bilbo tries to leave because he agrees with what Thorin said. And then Beaufort, one of the dwarves, he's honestly one of my favorite dwarves, says, "Oh no, what are you doing? You can't leave." But he said, and then Bilbo says, "No, I don't belong here. Thorin was right." And then he says, "Oh, I get it. You're homesick." And then Bilbo's like, "No, you don't get it. You're a dwarf. All you do is live on the road. You don't have a home." And he's like, "I'm sorry." And then Beaufort's like, "No, you're right. We don't belong anywhere." And then at the end of the film, there's a moment where Bilbo gets out of the cave with Gollum and he has the ring and he's hiding behind a tree. And the dwarves are like, "Oh, Mr. Baggins, he doesn't belong with us. He doesn't belong with the company." Thorin's like, "Oh, he left us. We won't be seeing him again." And there's honestly a moment where Bilbo's listening to them, and he's honestly, I think, contemplating not going back. But then he realizes what Thorin said, and like, and the reason why Thorin's been acting this way throughout the film is because he doesn't have a home. He doesn't have a home, and that is what the dwarves represent. You know, Bilbo and the dwarves represent two different things. That's why he doesn't like them at first. That's why they're so different. And that's why, as we go into the second film, they get along so much better, is because, like, in that scene where Bilbo comes out and he says, "You're right, I often think of my home, but you don't have one, and that's the reason why I came back." Because there's a moment where he is contemplating not coming back, but he does. And that he explains why he came back. And that's beautiful. Like, that is beautiful that they did that. And it made me cry, honestly. And then it's just, it pauses so long. It doesn't feel the need to suddenly push in another thing. Like, it pauses for a while just to see these characters' reactions. And that's the moment where the dwarves really find this respect for Bilbo that they never really had before. And it's beautiful, honestly. And then, you know, you have to have the battle with Azog or whatever, and there's a lot of deleted stuff, and apparently Bolg, who comes into play in the second film, who's Azog's son, he just kind of shows up in the second one, and he's like, "Hey, I'm here." In the original cut, he was going to be in this film, he had a different design and everything, and based on the book written by J.R.R. Tolkien, originally in the book, they explain the backstory. He fought Azog in Moria, and he chopped off his hand, and in the books, Azog was killed in Moria, and Bolg is the main foe that is chasing them. And also in the book, goblins and orcs are the same thing, they're not different. So goblins and orcs, in the movies, they try to distinguish them as being different, but the blade glows blue, like, on their three swords when any of them are near. In the books, it's goblins and orcs are the same thing, because they call Bolg the goblin in the book. And also, there isn't nearly as many scenes in the books as the orcs chasing him down, and all that. But I don't mind what the movie did. I don't mind that the movie changed things up. I really don't mind at all. And there are a few scenes in the film that I think are a little out of place. Like, some of the humor at the beginning works well because it is the dwarves coming into Bilbo's life and he doesn't like them and he's all confused by it. And then when and that works well. But then there's like a scene in Rivendell where it's like Gandalf talking to Saruman, Elrond, and Galadriel. And then he just cuts to the dwarves, and there's Bomber the fat dwarf, and they throw him a sausage, and then like the chair that he's on collapses because of too much weight. And then it cuts back to the serious scene, and it's like, that wasn't really necessary. And like there was like this part where with Radagast where he pulls the stick bug out of his mouth, and it's like, and then like he's like, "I had a thought on the tip of my tongue. It's not a thought at all. It's just a little stick bug." I actually really enjoy the character of Radagast, but that does kind of interfere with the tone, because then a second later he's like, "Gandalf, I'm gonna talk seriously now," and it kind of interferes with the tone of the scene and kind of interrupts. So at some points in the tone and in the scenes, the jokes can interfere a little bit with the film, and the humor can interfere a little bit. But I think, like, a lot of the humor, like I say, is the subtle quirks and mannerisms of the actors playing these characters, which are just fantastic. Like, just like really funny moments, like when Bilbo stabs this warg, which is really dumb because the warg just runs into his sword, and then he takes like 10 minutes to pull it out of the warg's head, and then like he turns around and it's like, oh shoot, there's a giant army running down the hill. Like, stuff like that is really funny and it works really well. But there are certain humorous bits that kind of don't work very well, and there are a few little moments where some dialogue sounds weird, and there are some parts that kind of don't work for me too well. Like, in the book, the main criticism that a lot of people seem to make, like, a big plot hole out of is, oh, why didn't the eagles just fly them to the Lonely Mountain, to Erebor? And in the books, it's explained because they actually talk to the eagles after they fly them to the Carrock, which is where they land at the end of the film, where they're standing in this Lego poster that I pulled up, which is for the Lego Hobbit game. And they actually explain that the reason why they can't fly them there is because of the darkness and the witchcraft that dwells in Mirkwood. But in the films, they don't really explain that very well, so it can be criticized in the films, but in the books it's explained, but in the movie they didn't explain it, which is kind of dumb. Also, when they get to the Carrock, Thorin, like, wakes up or whatever, and then he, like, goes to Bilbo and he's like, did I not say you were not supposed to be part of our company? I've never been so wrong in all of my life. And it's really cheesy. It doesn't work very much. It doesn't really work very well for me, and it's because it doesn't really work very well with the established character and Thorin Oakenshield as we know him as a character. That's why it doesn't work very well, because he's like, I've never been so wrong in all my life. It doesn't seem like something Thorin would say. Like, if he's like, oh, I was wrong, that would work. But, like, the way they write it, it just seems so cheesy and melodramatic, and it doesn't work very well for me in the film. And, you know, another thing is they try to make this big thing where Thorin finds out Azog's alive at the end, and he walks up on the warg, and Thorin's like, it cannot be, I thought you died of your wounds, and it's like, dude, you chopped his hand off. That doesn't automatically mean that he died of his wounds. Like, all you did was chop his hand off. That doesn't mean he died from that, you know? It's kind of dumb, and, like, they show him on Weathertop, which is kind of a little fan service moment for the Lord of the Rings fans, because, ooh, Weathertop. If you're a Middle-earth fan, you'll know Weathertop, and we'll talk about Weathertop probably when we get to the Fellowship of the Ring, but it's just meant to be a little fan servicey moment, because it's a location we know. But Azog is shown there, and I think another way to make it better is if you have the Goblin King in Goblin Town say, I had a bet with the white orc, the pale orc, your enemy. And then he tells Azog to go find or he tells one of his goblins to go tell Azog the news that they found Thorin. And that works well because Azog does show up, so that actually makes sense why Azog shows up at the end. But, in the book, it's actually the goblins that keep chasing them after they kill the Goblin King in Goblin Town. So the battle in the Battle of the Five Armies is actually the goblins that were tracking them. It wasn't the orcs, it was the goblins, and Bolg was the leader of the goblins. So his group of goblins and the goblins from Goblin Town kind of joined together because they killed the Goblin King, and they killed Bolg's father Azog. Azog isn't the main villain in the book, it's Bolg. So they kind of team up, and that's where the Battle of the Five Armies comes into play in the books rather than in the films. I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent and explaining that, but, like, like, if they just had, going back to the main thing I was saying is, if they wanted that twist to work better, they could have just had the Goblin King say, oh, I made a deal with the White Orc, and, I would cut off your head and I would give it to him. And rather than just show him on Weathertop, you show him in the flashback, and then you have little moments where they're like, who did you tell about your journey? And these little bits, like, teases about Azog, and then when Thorin realizes it's Azog, that would probably hit harder than it does in the movie. That's just me personally, I think that would have probably hit harder. Yeah, and then another thing is, in the books, the goblins do chase them down the mountain, and in the movie, they just kind of stop chasing them. Like, they land on the ground after the bridge collapses in Goblin Town, and then they get up, and then the goblins are chasing them, and then they get out of the mountain, and then the goblins just kind of stop chasing them, which doesn't really make sense in the movie. That's something that the book did a lot better, obviously. But I just really love this movie. Other than those little bits in there that just don't really work very well, this is a great film, honestly. It's one of my favorite theater experiences that I've ever had in my life, and being able to experience this trilogy, because I love The Lord of the Rings and all, but I didn't get to experience that trilogy. I experienced this trilogy each film at a time. I saw it each Christmas from 2012 to 2014, each of those Christmases, and went to see The Hobbit, the new Hobbit film. And that was definitely an experience, so maybe that's why I just appreciate this more than The Lord of the Rings trilogy, but I love The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. I think, at least to me, I think it's a fantastic film. I think it deserves more credit, and there are some problems that I have with it, but overall, it's just so much more interesting to me than a lot of these other franchises. Like, I love Marvel, I love Star Wars. I used to, at least. And I guess I kind of like Star Wars. I really love Harry Potter, and I love all these franchises, but the Lord of the Rings always stuck. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. The Hobbit obviously came first, if you didn't know. It's always stuck out to me as a more interesting concept, because Harry Potter, Star Wars, as much as I hate to admit it, those movies are, not so much Marvel, but those two in particular, they are stories that follow a simplistic formula of, oh, the chosen one, and he was destined to fight the bad guy. In The Hobbit, it's just about a guy, and he learns about the world and learns to go on an adventure and, like, becomes a different person. And that's just so much more interesting to me, because Bilbo Baggins isn't the chosen one. He's just a guy. He's just a hobbit. He's just the small thing, the good thing, the things that we take for granted that keep the darkness at bay. And that's true. Because there's a lot of things that are wrong in this world, but there's always those nice people out there in the world, and those good things that happen to us that keep these bad things from really taking over our lives. And I'm glad that The Hobbit brings that up, you know? So I'm going to give The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey an A-. This series will continue. Soon I'll be talking about The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug. Thank you for sticking with me throughout this video, if you did. I know not a lot of you know about The Hobbit, and a lot of you probably saw this video and were like, oh, The Hobbit, I better go watch that. But if you did stick with me, thank you, and this series will continue. I will go up to The Return of the King, which is obviously the last film in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But yeah, thank you for watching this if you stuck with me all the way through it, and I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.